part of my life. So I wanted to leave that aspect of it available and not just, quote unquote, fine artists. Or so, I've had sprinklings of musicians in, throughout the episodes. And I've also talked to a lot of artists who do mess around and play music, or, will jam on the side or have DJ'd or whatever it is. But usually artists have a relationship to music, and musicians always have a relation to art because they do cover art, and they, a lot of them have visuals for shows and all that stuff. So, I just, it's I guess selfish in a way that I just wanted to have that option open. The other side of it real quick is that when I critique or when I'm teaching, I often bring up music as a parallel for thinking about critique or thinking about expression, because I feel like it's a great, almost like completely different but very similar way of sort of expressing yourself. And a lot of times I feel like music can ease the critique, or it can ease an artist into thinking like, oh, okay, I see, like that's a nice sort of like parallel discussion of, tones, like colors. Or I do that a lot with music. So I think that it's a natural habitat for me to place music in the context of talking about art, almost probably to a fault or annoyance when I ask people what their paintings or sculptures sound like, or what are they listening to, that I'm just really interested in that.
Okay, so I want to know more about that. I mean, do you actually have them critique a Kanye song, or is it just like, do you kind of give them a frame of reference, or is it just in terms of speaking in terms of metaphors, using musical metaphors in terms of the language?
It's probably a little bit of all that, but mostly I think, if you look at, like, a lot of the discussion about art is couched in art history and what came before it. And, why is this relevant to what came before it? And why are we making this now? Or what does this mean? Like, it's that, the language of visual information is seen through the, the sieve of the past. And it's part of the language. And with music, I think the linearity of music, or where it comes from and the connections to it, sometimes are a little more raw and direct. Like if you hear like Daft Punk, you can think, okay, disco, funk, soul, R&B, and that comes from blues. And like there's a pretty straight lineage there that you can see. So often I'll do that, where I'll bring up like a connection between how music has progressed, or the way creativity has progressed through influence in music, and then maybe draw that as a parallel. And then sometimes it's about expressiveness, like something like a minimal, like, EDM track versus Ornette Coleman's free jazz with two drummers playing like, at the same time in chaos. I think if you bring that into a discussion about chaos and control in painting, it can be an interesting way to sort of think about it differently, other than just, Jackson Pollock versus, Agnes Martin.
When you laid out your book, did you lay it out kind of topically where things overlapped in these conversations, or is it kind of going from extract to extract from some of the best of moments?
Yeah, what happened was when I first started, the idea of maybe having a book, or this podcast existing in another realm where people who don't listen to podcasts can still engage in the content. I had an idea that it was just going to be these, excerpts, like all these excerpts from the conversations that are just, a lot of the great ones that I felt like were great conversations, maybe the whole thing, and then maybe just snippets of things related to theme. And then, working with the publisher and talking to friends and like thinking through the ideas, it kind of morphed, because that would just be basically, a transcription of the podcast, which I don't think would be the most interesting thing to just sit there and read. So we've actually had, a few writers write sort of like pieces about the artists that, we selected 30 artists who, we feel was a diverse cast of people who make amazing work. And, there's these written pieces that use quotes from the podcast and sort of flesh out the story of these people. And, I wrote a sort of piece at the beginning talking about how the podcast came to be, what it means to me, the intention, the sort of significance of it. And then there's these sort of written pieces on the 30 artists. And then there's the sort of quotes or, snippets based on theme, whether it's music or art school. Cause there's little great nuggets in these conversations. Just like, I love the idea of, just having a quote from, Chris Martin about, Miles Davis or something, or seeing Basquiat, and then someone else talking about how critiques sucked at art school or something, like it's kind of a fun thing to just delve into. And I think I drifted away from it being like a documentation of the podcast necessarily, and more of an extension of, the artist that I've talked to, and fleshing it out more.
Brian, I thought it might be fun if we play a word association game. It's sort of a Brian Alfred drinking game, kind of a bingo.
I haven't done that in a while.
A bingo card of Brian Alfred terms. And so I thought maybe I could throw some things at you. What about blue collar work ethic?
So you want me to just basically
Sure. What is that?
Respond.
Yeah, respond.
That's my dad. My dad was a hardworking guy, and I think that really rubbed off on me, and it informed my life, because he worked double shifts and he drove a truck, and that's my whole life. It's just like, blue collar, working hard, and I think that's woven into me. So I'm sure when I talk to other people, there's that touchstone. Just like I feel like Pittsburgh is like that.
Yeah,
it's part of me.
Sure. Well, that was another square on the bingo card. No, that's fine. But let me ask you, just to follow up on that. I mean, that's ingrained in you, right? And so, how do you see it manifesting itself in your work?
In the sense that I just can't stop working. Like I find, I think unconsciously, I'm motivated to work hard at stuff, because that was what I saw. And my mother too worked like crazy. So, it's what I was around, and there was just an honesty in it. I think it wasn't about like getting rich or trying to make a lot of money, because we certainly weren't there. It was just about, you just got to work hard. And that was like when I played soccer, it was like, my dad always taught me just do it, and when I changed from being a medical student at University of Pittsburgh to, an art major at Penn State, my parents were basically like, it doesn't matter what you do, just work 150% at it, so I think that it's just kind of like ingrained, and it makes, to this day, maybe to a fault, I just can't take a break.
All right, so blue collar, Pittsburgh, Warhol.
Yeah, I was watching the past couple of nights. I've been watching that new documentary, and which has been great. And talking to friends over social media about it, people sending me messages, and I don't know. It's weird. It's kind of like, I don't know how to divorce myself from my feelings and familiarity with Warhol coming from Pittsburgh, because he was so prevalent at an early age. Like I always saw Warhol stuff. But I do think, knowing reading the books that I've read and going to the museum, and, and investing a lot of sort of like my interest in Warhol, I do think that the general population, art viewing population, has a certain perception of him that was just surface. And there was a lot going on there that he kind of, hid away from in his personality and his sort of self-consciousness, and and he was really conscious of everything and extremely intelligent. And obviously no one who makes work after Warhol doesn't have Warhol in the work in some way, shape, or form. So I mean, I'm a fan.
Yeah, so how does Warhol show up in your work?
Pretty directly, I think. I mean, I think both Warhol, the sensibility of maybe here's the most direct way. Warhol had this adage of like, I'm not that interesting. Like, it's not about me, it's about the work. So it was kind of like holding a mirror to society, and a lot of times, popular culture. And I don't think I'm interesting necessarily, but I want to show viewers how I'm looking at the world, that what I find interesting about the places around us and the people around us. So I think that's like a very similar sort of mindset, and those early paintings, like those, the dancing drawing, like schematics, and the typewriter that's unfinished with the pencil on it. And some of those early Warhol paintings really burned into my visual mind. And the suicide paintings and the car crash paintings, those always like hit pretty hard, and when I think of Warhol, flowers don't pop up, and Elvis doesn't pop up. It's those disaster series, or the piss paintings and stuff like that I really think are where he let the grit in, or Empire, which I think is one of the most amazing, you know meditations on urban life and visuals. It's just, I think that stuff really, burned into my visual mind.
It's always curious to wonder how much of his public persona was performance art, right? Like people, I think a lot of people, on the periphery kind of think that's who Andy Warhol was, but I really wonder who he was when he was Andrew Warhol living with his mom in some apartment, right?
Yeah, definitely. And if you look at his early work and his drawings and what he was doing when he first moved to the city, and you could see his hand in there, and you knew that his mother did like the text things. I mean, there was a real bond there, and the quote unquote performance art of it, I feel like, was more about him hiding his self consciousness, or what he was, about things that he felt uncomfortable about himself. So it wasn't so much that he was trying to be, like, I'm going to be this, this person. It was more of like wearing a mask, to protect his insecurities, seemingly.
All right, so we've got Blue Collar, Warhol, Pittsburgh. What about Skowhegan?
Skowhegan. That was Skowhegan for me was the perfect thing at the perfect time, because I just came out of 2 years of grad school, which were, hyper rigorous, very competitive, tense atmosphere. And then the next thing you know, you're like out in this farthest studio through a cow pasture making work, and no one's there really. And I have all the time in the world. And people who came in weren't quote unquote teachers. They were just like, fellow participants. And it was a real laid back kind of communal vibe. And my work was able to go through a huge transition there over just 9 weeks. So it was pretty amazing. And I didn't go into the lake, and everyone teased me about it, but they all got duck itch whenever they went in there. So that taught me a lesson too. Stick to your guns. If you don't want to do something, don't fold to the peer pressure.
That's awesome. So did you make relationships there that you kind of, because it's sort of a summer camp sort of vibe, right?
Yeah, there's other terminology that went along with what happens at Skowhegan, but yeah, it was real. It felt very summer of love. No one's around. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like you were back then. We were off the grid. I mean, there was one computer in the office area that had internet, which was like dial up, and it was this is 1999, so it wasn't like it was blowing up yet. So you were really off the grid.
Right.
And, things could get wild. Yeah, it was fun. It was, and the people were cool. And I have very close friends out of that experience. It was, I met maybe even more so than graduate school. I met a core group of people there that I still am tight with today.
Have you had some of them on the podcast?
I have. Yes. Although I haven't been back to Skowhegan. You've never asked me back.
Yeah, maybe it's because you didn't go into the lake.
That's true. I didn't drink the punch, so to speak. That's true. That's probably like a scarlet letter on me forever.
Right.
I didn't even go in the lake. No, but yeah, there was some amazing, known artists who went there, and there were some really funny stories about that place, but that's for another podcast.
Right, exactly. Right. So, all right. So Blue Collar, Warhol, Pittsburgh, Skowhegan. What about Thelonious-Monk?
Thelonious-Monk. Well, I became conscious of Thelonious-Monk, I think, in high school when I would listen in Pittsburgh, when I would listen to the jazz station there, which was, oh God, I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, and I remember hearing Thelonious-Monk and the name and seeing his image and being intrigued. And then when I was at Penn State, I was a jazz DJ at the radio station there. And I think that's when I dug in deep to all the Blue Note stuff. And of course, Monk was on it. But the real Monk hit for me was when I saw the first time the video of him playing, which was like just amazing. He was so idiosyncratic and just did his own thing. And it's kind of magic. I think he entered my brain at the same time that Sun Ra entered the other